It's August, which is hard to believe, and many families I work with are preparing for their children to start school in the coming weeks. In fact, I saw a friend of mine post about yesterday being her children's first day of school. Of course, I'm recording this a few days in advance, and I know it'll come out on Monday, but man, the school season is here. This week, I'm going to share some back to school sleep tips for parents with preschoolers. And another trend I've noticed lately with some of my clients is that many parents are putting their toddlers in daycare for the very first time this fall. So they had some sort of other childcare arrangement in the early years or at least into toddlerhood, and now they are starting daycare. Since I've been receiving a lot more questions around helping toddlers adjust to daycare when they didn't attend as an infant, I'm going to touch on that as well as the preschool adjustments that we sometimes need in the sleep department. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. It is not uncommon for families to have sleep schedules that are a little more lax during the summer. Me included in recent years as my kids have gotten a little bit older. And while that can be part of the beauty of summer, the school year comes with more structure, or at least it's going to need to, even if we want to resist it. You may need to have your child out the door at a time that they are currently typically sleeping in the morning. This is why sleep should be included in your back to school planning. If you have a child who is going to be in preschool this year or a toddler who is heading to daycare for the very first time, I want to encourage you to not just focus on getting everything you need to buy on the school supply list, but also to start to shift to a school year sleep schedule so that your child is rested on that first day of school and ready to have a great year, both socially and academically. Studies have shown time and again that the amount of sleep children get is linked to learning engagement, learning retention, emotional regulation, and impulse control. And when we think about our toddlers and preschoolers, it's also worth noting that sleep affects separation anxiety and just overall anxiety. Meaning, sleep can certainly play a role in whether your child really struggles at school drop off and or whether or not they just generally enjoy their independent time away from their parents. So, logically, the first question I receive is, well, how much sleep is optimal for these toddlers and preschoolers, particularly during the school year? The answer is obviously going to be different and unique for each child. The exact amount of sleep your child needs is the amount that allows them to be happy, alert, and focused at school and allows them to come home without crumbling into a tired mess. I do, of course, have ranges that can be a helpful starting point when you're trying to nail down your child's optimal amount of sleep, or if you just have one of those kids that is generally always in good spirits and you're not sure where to begin. So, I like to see children between the age of 2 and 5 years old getting between 10 and a half and 12, maybe more, hours of sleep each night. So that's just the nighttime sleep. That's a big range, 10 and a half to 12 plus. And if your child naps and how long their nap is going to affect how much night sleep is optimal for them. Some great nappers, for example, may need as little as 10 and a half hours of sleep at night because they're getting an hour and a half to a 2.5 hour nap. Although there are also 2 year olds who are getting a 2.5 hour nap and still can sleep 11 plus. Some can sleep 12 hours at night. I will tell you that if you have one of these preschoolers who's no longer napping, I definitely like to see them in the 11 to 12 plus hour range of sleep. I know for some of you that's going to sound like so much sleep, but I want to tell you that I have a daughter who just turned 10 and she can still sleep up to 12 hours. Not every night, but she's solidly can sleep at least 11 hours. And when she's had a big day or she's overtired or we were out late the night before, she can absolutely hit that 12-hour range. So don't underestimate how much sleep your child can get to be their best little self. When you think about a sleep schedule for the upcoming school year or for daycare, the first thing you need to do is figure out what time they need to be up in the morning for you to get out the door at the right time. If they are currently sleeping later than that time that you need them up, you will definitely want to shift to an earlier bedtime. And ideally, do that at least a few days before school starts. The goal that I always have for children is for them to be waking naturally in the morning. This is absolutely the goal I like to have before we have children in that early puberty stage, which is when there is a big shift in their circadian rhythm. But for these littles, I absolutely like to see them waking on their own in the morning. So, if you need to wake your child up in order to get them ready for school or daycare, and you may not fully know this answer until it starts, so this is a good gauge. If you need to wake them up, I assure you that they could benefit from more sleep. And I'd strongly recommend getting there by shooting for an earlier bedtime because that's the easiest way to get them more sleep. And I know some of you have early risers. I too had an early riser for years. So, quickly, let me address what I mean by an early riser. If you have a truly early riser, it generally is not going to matter whether they go to bed at 6:30 p.m. or 10 p.m. No matter what time you put them to bed, they are up at an early hour. Let's say 6 a.m. So 6:30 p.m. bedtime, up at 6 a.m. 10 p.m. bedtime, up at 6 a.m. That's what I kind of classify as our permanently early risers. They don't ever sleep in, no matter how late you put them to bed. I want to let you know that those are the kids where it's a little trickier to nail down their optimal amount of sleep and their ideal bedtime schedule because we can't gauge on whether we had to wake them up or not. And so with those kids, sometimes we just need to keep walking that bedtime to an earlier time until we've maxed out their sleep. So let's take that 6 a.m. riser, for example. You put them to bed at 10 p.m., they wake up at 6 a.m. You move the bedtime up to 8 p.m., they wake up at 6 a.m. Okay, we're making progress. We've gotten 2 more hours of sleep, but have we hit that optimal amount? Then you'd move ahead to putting them to bed at 7 p.m. They're still sleeping till 6 a.m. Great, we're up to 11 hours. The question becomes, at what point do we start to lose ground? Meaning that we move the bedtime up earlier and earlier, and then there becomes a point where we can't hit the 6 a.m. because they have maxed out on their sleep. That means we've hit their optimal amount. If we keep going earlier, they'll actually start to wake earlier than 6 a.m. So that's something to think about with those kids who are just naturally early risers, no matter what you do. We need to walk back into their bedtime. So your goal is to maximize the amount of sleep they can get and to keep an eye on their behavior and try to hit that goal where you feel like you've maximized the amount of sleep they can get and they are their happy, best little selves. Now let's talk about those kids who are starting all day daycare for the very first time. First of all, please keep in mind that it can take several weeks for children to adjust to daycare. Depending on whether your child is an extrovert or an introvert, I like to say that daycare can be like going to an all day raging party with your friends if you're that extrovert. Or if you're a little more introverted, it can feel a little bit more like going to the office all day and you might really enjoy your colleagues, but it's really draining. Either way, whether you're partying all day or you're working all day, it's exhausting. And during those first few weeks, your child may need that rescue bedtime because I like to say they're kind of getting in shape. They're building their stamina to be able to go all day. You may find that your child practically comes home ready to go to bed. So they could go to bed at 6:30. They may need to refill their sleep tank as they get in shape. So keep that in mind and don't panic that they seem exhausted, but when in doubt, put them to bed a little earlier. Whether your child is going to daycare or preschool, they may start napping on a mat or a cot for the very first time. This gives a lot of parents anxiety, but I want to assure you that 95% of the kids I work with adjust to what we call mat napping amazingly well. It never ceases to amaze me. It may be the magic of the teachers who have this really clear structure and expectations set for the kids, and or I think the peer pressure of all the other kids doing it, because I recently had a family I worked with who said none of the kids were napping. And I think that's where we lost the peer pressure. So occasionally, this was really the first one I've had where it sounds like a whole class was struggling. But for the most part, I would say that there's some peer pressure in there. If all the other kids are doing it, I guess I'll lay down on this mat too. So whether it's clear structure from the teachers or peer pressure, parents are usually very pleasantly surprised with how well their children take to the cot or nap mat. I want to tell you that I don't want you doing anything in advance to prepare your child for these different naps. You don't need to practice the nap at home. Hopefully, your child's in a crib if they're still a napper. And I would say keep your home naps exactly the same. The goal is to send your child well rested. And just because they take to napping well at school on a mat or a cot, it does not mean they are ready to ditch their crib. Of course, some of these kids in the later preschool years will be out of their crib, but for these toddlers moving into daycare, and for some of these kids going to preschool for the first time, hopefully you'll be pleasantly surprised, but don't change anything at home. Now, let's talk about those preschoolers who are going for half days. These schedules are typically not ideal. They are often going 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And by the time you pick them up, you get them home, you feed them lunch, it has bumped out their nap schedule. So here's what I want to encourage you to do. Think about planning very simple lunches. If you have the bandwidth and you're able to prep them in advance so you can get your child home and just quickly feed them lunch, that's great. Simple lunches and then right down for the nap. So our goal is just to get them down for the nap as soon as we reasonably can. And then I would also encourage you to not change their nap schedule on the days they are home. So if prior to starting preschool, they were going down for their nap at 12:30 p.m., but on school days, you won't be able to realistically get them down for their nap until 1 p.m., that's okay. That is what it is. So you will target that 1 p.m. nap time on school days. But on all the other days, I would encourage you to keep that 12:30 nap since that was part of their optimal schedule. If your child ends up not napping well at school or at daycare, this is another great time to use the rescue bedtime. A bedtime 30 minutes earlier than usual can help your child make up for 30 minutes of missed daytime sleep, which can make a big difference as they head into their next day. Hopefully, after a few weeks, they will adjust to napping at school or daycare, but when in doubt, go for that early rescue bedtime. If your child hasn't started school yet, take the 3 to 7 days before to reset that nighttime sleep schedule if you already know you're going to need it. And then don't hesitate to shift to an even earlier bedtime if you realize that as they start school, it's more draining than you anticipated, and they actually need more sleep than was enough for them during the summer months. Being well rested will help your child and you adjust to the start of the new school year. Getting the proper amount of sleep will also help your child behave well, listen well, perform well, and just generally enjoy school more. Here's to an awesome school year for all of your littles. Thanks for joining me today. Next week, I'll be back to share school sleep tips for our elementary age children. I hope you'll join me again and share this episode with somebody that you know. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.